Welcome to Imposter Hour with Liz and Greg. We're here to explore the imposter syndrome that haunts creatives, delving into how it affects their lives and work. Join us as we chat with authors and artists about creativity, self-doubt, featuring imposter characters in their stories, and the occasional imposter who pops up in their day-to-day lives.
Today, we are thrilled to welcome Lauren Ling Brown to the show. Lauren received a BA in English Literature from Princeton University and an MFA in film production with a focus in screenwriting from the USC School of Cinematic Arts. She currently resides in Los Angeles, California, where she works as a film editor. Her debut novel, Society of Lies, was a Reese's book club pick, and as of this morning, an instant USA Today bestseller.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Lauren, and welcome. We're so thrilled you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk with you today.
We're thrilled to have you here, and thank you for making the time. We can only imagine that you have had quite a week, so
really appreciate it. It's been so fun. Thank you.
Yeah. How are you feeling with everything? Is it kind of, has it settled in? Is it settling in?
It still doesn't feel real. I just feel like full body chills and I'm pinching myself and it feels like I'm dreaming. It just means so much to me. It's the honor of my life to be a Reese's Book Club author.
Yeah.
Well, you've had such a fantastic publication. I think, obviously this book has lived with you for a long time, and we want to kind of hear about the inspiration and the process. And also just to acknowledge that not everyone's debut publication rolls out this way. And it can be a lot, and what I was thinking before we tuned in was, this idea of the milestones or the goals we set ourselves for authors. And, when they happen, do they actually satisfy that kind of feeling of okay, I'm good now, I've reached it. And does it make imposter syndrome less or go away if you do, in fact, have imposter syndrome? So maybe we can start there.
Sure. Yeah. Well, this whole thing has been such a blur because being in Reese's Book Club has been just a far off dream for me. I never expected this to actually happen, especially not with my debut. And she's been a role model for me for my whole life since I was a teenager. And then in film school was when Gone Girl came out and I was studying those screenplays, starting my early career when Hello Sunshine and Reese's Book Club was founded. So with Big Little Lies, reading all those screenplays, looking at the book too to see how they adapted it to a screenplay. So it's just beyond my wildest dreams and expectations to be here. And it just means a lot to me. So I'm feeling out of my element. I'm definitely feeling self-doubt, but I've been so actively trying to fight against imposter syndrome for so much of my life and career that at this point, 10 years into my career, I'm just so used to fighting it that I think I'll allow myself to feel self-doubt, but I try to reframe it every time I feel something that's similar to what we would think of as imposter syndrome.
Can you talk a little bit about reframing? Because I think that sounds like a wonderful, combative technique.
Yeah. So this weekend was Shine Away, which is Hello Sunshine's event in LA. And I got to see the live recording of the Brightside podcast with Danielle Robay and Simone Boyce. And Simone had this really interesting point where she said, we can reframe imposter syndrome to think of it as we're at the edge of our limit. So we're pushing ourselves in our career, in our sport, in whatever we're pursuing to go to that next level. And so maybe we've just broken through to that next level of our career. So I think that's a nice way of, reframing it to be this positive moment instead of feeling like you don't belong and you shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
You have.
Oh, I love that.
Your debut obviously is enjoying wild success and well deserved. But you, as you just alluded to, you had a long grind with your writing. I mean, as your bio mentioned, you majored in English at Princeton, went on to concentrate in screenwriting at USC Film School, and then you had mentioned I've seen you write that you kind of hit a wall with some of your early screenplay submissions and your first couple of novel attempts. So could you talk a bit about kind of muscling through that period to get to where you are now?
Yeah. I took my first creative writing class in college in 2010, I think it was, something like that. And so that's when I really fell in love with writing, and I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a novelist, but a few things set me back. One was, and then I ended up going to film school to pursue screenplay writing. Mm-hmm. And I wrote a lot of screenplays for basically what was my thesis. I wrote a screenplay set at Princeton about a secret society. And this was in around 2014 or 15, so 10 years ago. And then, I couldn't find an agent, didn't know anyone who was a writer, didn't know how to break into a writer's room or something like that. So I gave up, put that dream of writing on hold, and I needed to work. I needed to, pay my rent. So I got a job in post-production in the Vault, which is an entry-level position, then just worked my way up over 10 years to being an assistant editor, later an editor. Yeah. And then wrote Society of Lies, was the third of 3 attempts at a novel over the pandemic.
Wow. So this wasn't your first attempt at a novel, which is always great to hear, because I think people who are aspiring writers feel like every novel that gets published was, easy to write and the first novel until they've tried to do it. What was it about this one, both in the experience of writing it, the circumstances around it, the inspiration that was different than from the other 2 novels?
That's a great question. I think the first 2 novels, the first one was about sisters, but it was a sci-fi. It was kind of an action sci-fi. The second one was a domestic thriller. And then the third one, I really drew from who I was when I was 18 and first going to college and feeling like an outsider. And then later drew from the relationship with my sister. So I think that it came from a very true place, a lot of the character building at least. And then introduced this question to the characters. Would you stay in the secret society that promised you the life of your dreams if you learned that that new life came at the expense of someone else? So that moral question that's at the heart of the book was something I combined with the true experience of being multiracial, Black and Asian, and not feeling like you really fit in anywhere.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I think I've heard...
No, go ahead. Please.
I've heard, I think, when you were talking about the book before it came out, that you were going through kind of a harder part of your life when you were working on this book. Can you tell us about that? Because that's a subject we love to talk about.
Yeah. I think it's really important to talk about some of our struggles too, like harder, difficult parts of our life, because on social media these days, you really mostly see the good, the wins, the success. Like after many years of hard work, you see the result maybe, because people don't necessarily want to be vulnerable and share their worst times in their life. Yeah. So over the pandemic, I had to get a series of 3 or so surgeries on my hips, both hips and my knee. And this was after several more surgeries on my knee. So it wasn't the first one. It's just kind of an ongoing thing that I've had to deal with. And I was also going through a breakup after, being with someone for many years. And it was a really low point. And I was struggling with mental health, with digestion, all these other things related to the surgeries, related to just the pandemic and everything. And that's when I started to write, because I needed something to occupy my time and to think deeply about. And so that I really started turning to writing to get through that time.
Did that also, sort of going through all of that stuff, did that, you just sort of mentioned that you're with Society of Lies, which was your third novel, that it was in a more personal place. Do you think sort of being in that headspace allowed you to kind of tap into a lot of that stuff a little more readily?
Yeah, I think so. And I wrote it in, January 2021. So it was this time in America that we were deep in the pandemic. It was after George Floyd, the summer before, was murdered, and then the Capitol in January, and our democracy felt like it was under threat, under attack. And I think that all of the tension and everything related to the pandemic and different interactions I'd had with people on the street, whether it was microaggressions or racism or sexism, whatever it was. All of that sort of was what I was talking about with my family and friends. And I think it made its way into the novel too.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Well, one of the things about Society of Lies that I just loved so much was this kind of idea of setting, your story at Princeton and it being a microcosm of, a much larger societal issue. And you referred to otherness and belonging and not belonging in an earlier answer. And I think I told you I grew up in Princeton, so I think technically I'm a townie, but
That's amazing.
I had, and I want to talk more about setting, but I had a very particular experience of like working and living around Princeton, and I know from experience how white it is, and very privileged. And there is a caste system for sure. And I thought you captivated that, captured it so well in your novel. So could you talk a little bit about, all of those themes or any of those themes?
Yeah. So for me, it's important to me that that readers know that the book could be set anywhere at any university. And it's more a commentary on society as a whole rather than on my experience at Princeton, because my experience was great. I was an English major. I was in BAC dance. I played soccer. There were so many beautiful, great things about my time there. And so I think that I was drawing from lots of different periods in my life on how I felt other, and being Black and Asian, multiracial. I never really felt like I belonged. And something I've been thinking about recently is how we all have sort of our groups of people we feel the most comfortable with because we can find some commonality with them. And if you look at someone and you think, oh, that person has nothing in common with me, they just, for whatever reason, maybe they dress differently, maybe they have tattoos and piercings, maybe they're just very different from you for whatever reason, you automatically see them as other, and maybe you don't trust them as easily. And so that was sort of the feeling that I really wanted to bring into the novel and sort of explore those ideas within the scenes.
Right. It's interesting, you're talking about community, and I wanted to ask you about this as well. Naomi, one of your characters in the book, gets into dance as a way to sort of form community after the death of her mother in the story. And I was going to ask you a bit about that kind of, for you, the importance of community, both creatively and otherwise, and how that kind of feeds into everything.
Yeah, I was in BAC, the Black Arts Company dance group at Princeton too. And I joined sophomore year, and I think that I really found a space where I felt welcome and could connect with my identity through dance as well, through hip hop. And it was just such a cool space to be in. I miss it. And I talk to my friends who are in the dance company with me all the time about how we wish we could just bring it back. But having that kind of community, I'm really lucky to have a lot of female friends in my life now and in college that really uplift me. And it's a huge part of my writing and the reason that this book got to the place that it did, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, you've written into one of my favorite kind of subgenres, dark academia, which, multiple wonderful books are set actually in Princeton, but one came to mind when I was reading, and I was wondering if it was influential for you, Donna Tartt's Secret History. And I would love to know, if that book and others kind of influenced you, if you were even aware of them, or this was just kind of a pull you had to write into the space.
I definitely think that those had an influence on me. The Secret History, there was also The Rule of Four set at Princeton many years ago. I think it was like 2004 or something. And I was a teenager when I read that one. And then The Secret History I read sometime probably in my 20s. And I just love Donna Tartt's writing. But I think dark academia and suspense and Never Let Me Go is another book by Kazuo Ishiguro, who that definitely influenced me. I love Americana, which is set at Princeton.
Mm-hmm. So many good books.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask a little more about that. One of the things that I really love about your novel, that I admire about it, you do such a great job of exposing the myth of meritocracy in the Ivy League sort of university system. And I was thinking, in the context of our show, what you do there is you create this really interesting dynamic around imposter syndrome, where it's sort of inverted, where the characters in your story who should be feeling the most imposter syndrome objectively don't, and vice versa. So it creates this really, I wonder what brought you to that, kind of explore that theme in that way.
That's so interesting. I hadn't thought of it like that. Which characters can you say, or is it would it spoil?
Well, I'm always like, just the way that this doesn't really spoil anything. I mean, the fact that you have a character who is tutoring a character who, you know what I mean? Like, the whole dynamic of that just really sort of inverts the whole kind of imposter thing in an interesting way, because of, again, that kind of that illusion of meritocracy that the system is built on.
I see what you're saying.
You know what
yes.
I mean?
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. I didn't think of it as inverting the imposter syndrome trope, or whatever we would call it. But I see what you're saying now. I think sometimes when people are, for that example in particular, when people are so used to the way that things are, and having privilege, I guess this is what I'm trying to say, that people who have an immense amount of privilege don't feel like imposters, because it's just the way that things are and the way that the world works.
Right.
And I think they probably believe that it is a meritocracy, and that they achieve the things they do through their hard work. But what I think is that it's the people around you who lift you up. And that's true for anything, like any of this privilege. My whole publishing team, who worked with me for years to make the book stronger, those people, those women lifted me up. And so now that I have this privilege of being in Reese's book club, I want to do the same for other women.
That's fantastic. Have you found, now that you're kind of on the other side of the publishing process and kind of seen how many people contribute to that, and have you started to connect with other authors in the community, kind of while you're out there? Are you sharing those experiences? Are you hearing different kinds of experiences? What has that been like?
Yeah, it's amazing having authors to reach out to. When I first started writing this over the pandemic, when I was writing the other novels, I didn't know anyone who had published a book or who was an author. And so now, over the weekend, I got to meet 30 of the other Reese's Book Club authors, and some people who I saw as heroes, who I've loved their work for many years, and got to tell them that. And it was just so nice that they were really welcoming and warm, and said, message me anytime you need anything. I'm here to help. So having that community is incredible.
Are there any feelings of imposter syndrome coming up with that? Because I'm thinking of my own experiences, both past and present.
Well, actually, on Sunday, I got to speak with Andrea Bartz, and Ashley Elston, and Ashley Flowers was moderating. And it was on this stage called the Sun Stage. And there were 1,000 chairs, 1,000 seats, and they were almost full of women watching us. And it was only my third time speaking in public. You were there at the first one, I think, at Thriller Fest.
You were at that point.
Yeah. So that's a really special moment. Yeah. So you've seen me speak in public 2 out of the 3 times. And the other time was the book launch.
You were pretty solid in that as well. So,
On what?
You were pretty solid on the first try. So I'm sure it's only, gotten more streamlined and graceful since then.
I did forget the name of my book, though.
That
happens all.
That's really fast.
We've forgotten the characters in conversations about the book.
Yeah.
We've forgotten the others' names. I think probably it's just you're in such a spin.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, that's part of the whole
My heart starts racing. I start sweating. My palms are sweaty.
Oh yeah.
So we love to talk about, the difference between being a writer and an author, those kind of like two, dueling experiences. Have you found if you have a preference for one or the other? How is it being now that you have to actually market your book?
Yeah, it's such a different skill and something I never expected. I just thought I just didn't know anything about publishing. So I thought it was just, you write the book, you're done, hand it over to the agent. I thought that the editor actually rewrites it for you, but that's not the case. And so I didn't know that I would be doing podcasts or speaking in front of crowds. I had a huge fear of public speaking until very recently, like this weekend, I would say. Yeah.
I mean, I was terrified for our first book event. I don't know if you remember, Greg, but when we were kind of like backstage, we were at the Barnes and Noble on the Upper West Side. I said to him, "There's a good possibility I'm going to stroke out, and at the most, and at the very least, I'm just going to forget everything and where I am." So we had like a signal, and we have the benefit of being in a partnership. So what you're doing is doubly hard because you're doing it solo. But it's amazing. And I just, wanted to relate a memory because it relates to Princeton. When I was young and aspiring to be a writer, I worked at a high-end kitchen store that I don't think is there any longer. But we had a lot of really illustrious regulars come in because we had coffee, among other things. And Joyce Carol Oates lives in Princeton, and she would be around. And she was so influential on my early writing and still is. And I loved all of her books. And I found myself like inches from her. And I wanted to tell her how much she meant to me. And I absolutely forgot like my own name. I couldn't remember a single title of anything she read. And I don't think I was able to get a coherent sentence out. So if I ever get to be in the same room with her again, I will apologize. But
that's how, I felt the same way when I met Reese, because she's, a role model for me my whole life, but I couldn't speak.
And to realize that a role model of yours has read something you've written, and not only that, picked it as one of her favorites. It's so incredible. And I still get, just kind of euphoric and have to pinch myself that people read things that we've written and they have opinions about characters that you've created, which, I think is a good kind of segue into, you've written a beautiful story about sisters and sisterhood, which is one of my favorite subjects. How is that important to you, and how did that kind of become the spine of your characters?
Well, the first draft, actually, when I met Alexandra and when she agreed to represent me, didn't have sisters. I mean, it had sisters in it, but the younger sister wasn't at the center of the story. She was just sort of on the periphery. And Alexandra thought, it would be so much stronger if the death surrounded the younger sister, because it would make that dynamic very interesting and something to explore. So then once the younger sister came more into the story, I thought about my own sister, who's 4 years younger, and my brother, who's 10 years younger, and really infused a lot of that experience into the story about, how sisters, it's so complicated because you grow up in these complicated family dynamics that we all have, competing for your parents' attention. And then we were so close growing up. And then we went to college, started our own careers, and drifted apart. And now that we're in our 30s, we're close again, which is really amazing and special to me. But it was sort of a lot of that influenced the sister relationship.
I love that. And I love that you have, one of the sisters having been parentified very early. So she carries, this kind of complex layer of guilt. We actually haven't asked you to talk about what the book is about, which we don't always do on the show, but I think because your book is so good and
Oh,
everyone should read it, would you mind
thank
giving us
you.
a little capsule?
Of course. So, Society of Lies is a dark academia set at Princeton about two sisters born 10 years apart who get invited to join the same secret society that promises them the life of their dreams. But soon they learn that the life of their dreams comes at a cost, and that cost is someone else in the society that they're hurting. So the moral question at the center of it is, will she stay even when she learns that the society is hurting someone else?
I wanted to ask, I kind of follow up on what you were just talking about sisterhood, but on a sort of a larger scale. Naomi, one of your characters, in the book, her thesis addresses how women have been silenced throughout history for upsetting the status quo. And then that theme is then sort of echoed through the novel. And it occurred to me as I was thinking about both of those things that you've also written a novel that in and of itself pushes back on the status quo and a lot of these assumptions. We mentioned meritocracy and all of those kinds of things. Was that something you kind of went in, anticipating all of these kind of things echoing out, or did those kind of form as you wrote?
Interesting. That particular statement, I remember Fiona says this at Naomi's funeral. That was in there pretty early, actually. But I like to layer in layers of mystery threads as well as depth into the writing as I do more and more drafts over, years.
Okay.
But that one in particular was in there, I think, pretty early.
Okay. Was that something that you were had you gone into the idea of this novel with like, I'm going to kind of explore that theme and push back against some of these sort of societal things, or you kind of found that as it flowed, as it sort of unspooled, the story itself?
That's a good question. I do think that I went into it wanting to explore belonging and privilege.
Yeah.
And really, it's important to me that my writing is feminist and that the villain, is, I don't want to give anything away. That's a spoiler. Right. But that this mastermind secret society is, the true villain, I guess I would say.
Sure.
And that's all I can really say. but yeah, so I did go into it thinking about those themes, and those were also some of the conversations I was having with friends and family during the time I was writing it that made their way in to the novel. Mm-hmm.
And just specifically, because I don't think I remember, Princeton doesn't have fraternities and sororities for a specific reason, right? So they're eating clubs, but they essentially function as the Greek system. Is that more or less correct?
They do, but they also have sororities. But generally, the fraternities and sororities are more for freshmen. And then once you're a sophomore, about 60 or 70% of Princeton students join an eating club. And I believe there's about 11. There's a few bicker, and then there's about 11 eating clubs total, and the rest are sign-in.
Okay.
Meaning that you don't have to bicker, which is the rush process to get in.
Right. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the eating clubs, for people who have never been, it's like they're these huge mansions. They're like incredible, and they're all really concentrated in one area. And it's, I don't know if it's your experience, but I think you captured this incredibly well in the book. I found Princeton to be completely spooky and and eerie and very beautiful and old, of course. And I think it's one of the setting of growing up there is one of the contributors to my kind of leaning towards darker fiction and mystery and thrillers. Was this something that was always kind of in your creative blood? Did that get ramped up when you were matriculating there? What was kind of the chicken or egg?
That's a good question. When I was young, like a teenager, I did read Stephen King and some creepy thrillers. And then when I went to Princeton, I was really obsessed with Poe and T.S. Eliot and all of the Brontes and Romanticism. So, and, studying English, I got to read these amazing books in these beautiful settings in the libraries. So I think that setting really had an impact on me during this time of my life, 18 to 22, when you're so impressionable.
Yeah.
And it sounds
Do
like.
you think you'll stay? Sorry. Do you think you'll stay kind of in this general genre flavor, or do you want to write in different spaces?
Great question. I think for my next book, which I'm working on now, it's the same sort of past-present narrative, multi-generational mystery, and about women's relationships. So I really want to write women's stories primarily and show that they're complex and explore, moral dilemmas. That's really important to me in my writing. I really respect Jodi Picoult and Taylor Jenkins Reid and Celeste Ng, people who, writers who write about these kind of deeper topics. So I would love to do that. But at some point, I might want to write more contemporary fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was going to ask, it sounds like from what you've been talking about, your kind of reading diet has consisted of, I mean, you mentioned poetry, you've mentioned thrillers, you've mentioned kind of upmarket fiction, literary fiction, commercial fiction. And it shows in your writing. I mean, in Society of Lies, there are these really beautiful sort of poetic passages. You've obviously got your chops in terms of like your plotting, your character development, all of that kind of stuff. When you go in, are you, you have like, I guess what I'm trying to say is that you have a very well-rounded skill set. When you're going in to work on a book, are you consciously like picking different things from different influences, or is it sort of like an amorphous thing that you're just kind of drawing from?
Well, first of all, thank you for saying that. I feel like I'm so new to this world, having this as my debut, and I still feel like I'm learning so much all the time. That's a good question. So I think my first draft, I'm the type of person to like to plot a lot first.
Yeah.
So I'll brainstorm ideas, pitch them to my friends and family, come up with some kind of high level concept. Mm-hmm. And then I start plotting, basically using a 3-act structure and beats of the major events, and then start sketching out the scenes, pretty rough. And once I start writing, it's still pretty rough for the first draft. And after that, I'll just reread it back on my Kindle or print it out and just go through that process over and over again and add more scenes here and there, move things around, and use the flashcard method, where you have each scene on the flashcard, or lay out the chapters all over the floor. Yeah. And I think every time I do another draft, I'll layer in more depth or more of the mystery.
Okay. So you kind of build it out that way. I was going to ask too about the,
yeah.
You mentioned your, the 3-act structure and the card stuff. I mean, it sounds like you have been able to draw a bit from your experience with screenwriting and kind of apply that with the novel process as well. Have you found that pretty intuitive? Has that moved pretty like naturally from one sort of framework to the other?
Yeah, a funny thing about that actually is that the first draft that I queried Alexandra, my agent, with was too much of a screenplay. It was all dialogue and setting, and there wasn't that like interiority, the character interiority that novels have, and what I love about reading novels. But so I really had to work hard when I was rewriting with her over that first year that we worked together to infuse more of that thinking and feeling into the book.
Did that give you a certain...
So, I mean...
Sorry. I was just going to kind of... No. I think I'm a slight lag. I apologize. I was going to ask if sort of... That's something I think about, the difference between prose writing and screenwriting is that, as you're kind of alluding to, with screenwriting, you are sort of one of the challenges of that is to get a lot of exposition into dialogue because you don't have the kind of expositional space to write things as you do in a novel. So was that kind of freeing for you to be able to like realize now you have all of this kind of real estate to work in terms of, character development, all the story stuff?
Yeah, totally. And also about screenwriting, I feel like I'm a failed screenwriter because I never worked in the industry as a screenwriter. I just tried when I was in my, right after grad school. But so I guess having that background is more in the classroom and reading a lot of screenplays. But I guess I did come out in my writing, and I do feel freer in long form fiction writing, like novels. Yes. I prefer novels.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask, like, take us back now earlier, kind of two parts, but I'm curious about what your creative, inspiration influences were, books, movies, and then how has that kind of changed or evolved as you've now kind of become a writer yourself?
So for movies, they were definitely a big inspiration too. I really love Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and Atonement, especially because it's about this young girl who has sort of a moral dilemma and tries to meddle in her older sister's life and then causes tragedy afterwards. So I like those kinds of that stage of life. Some other movies I like more recently are Get Out and Parasite. And books that I've loved, I think I said Never Let Me Go. Also Tomorrow. Kylie Reid, Such a Fun Age. There are just so many. Zadie Smith I really liked in college. I read her for the first time. Yeah.
Those are some, yeah. I would love to also kind of getting into other sort of art forms and things as well. One of the things that I really love about the book is the way you write music into it, both as a way for the characters to bond, but then also you kind of use it as this snapshot of their tastes and their leanings and that kind of thing. And as I was reading that, and also you use, I just love your taste in music. Like you dropped in some great, some great artists in there, and I love that. I love that it's records and the whole bit. Like I dug that. But I was wondering also what your, obviously you relate to music. You can tell through the writing. What kind of role does music have in your creative process, if any?
That's a cool question. So I grew up dancing, and I did hip hop in college, but I also did contemporary. And when I was younger, ballet a little bit growing up, but I was never any good at it. Okay. But I really do love dance and movement as an expression of creativity. And so I think music for me, and then my partner, my fiance, Brad, he plays music and, went to music school. His whole career is in music. So we bond over music a lot. Like most nights he'll be playing the piano and I'll be singing and dancing nearby. That's just like a big part of our life. So music has always, inspired me in that way too, and been a way of connecting with people.
Do you listen to music when you're writing?
I don't really, because Brad actually plays a lot of music. So I have my headphones on. And I'm writing.
This is a topic we haven't actually talked about too much. We did when we had Fiona Davis on because, we were talking about two creative people living in the same space and creating at the same time, and, the kind of advantages and disadvantages. And I'm just wondering, I think we all know how important, whether it's spouses, partners, friends, family, are in supporting us through the endeavor of bringing a project to life. What is it like for you to be living alongside someone who's also creative and maybe bringing projects to life?
I love it. I feel like, so he was the one who read that Princeton screenplay about the secret society from well, it would have been like 7 years ago over the pandemic. He read it and we were just dating. It was early days. And he's like, you know what? This is pretty good. Why don't you write anymore? And I was like, no, writing's just a hobby. I don't really write that much. I don't take it seriously, but I write short stories here and there. He's like, you know what? Why don't you? But I said, I've always wanted to write a novel. And he was like, well, why don't you just try it? And so his creative brain sort of encouraged me to pursue my own creative pursuits as well. And he's, you know, I also do aerial, and he tries aerial, and then he teaches me guitar and a little bit of, you know, I'll sing while he plays piano. So they all overlap, and it just creates this really cool, I love him obviously, but I love the creative life that we have here.
Yeah, that sounds
I love that.
It sounds incredibly idyllic, and also it sounds like such a wonderful kind of energy flow. Like it sounds like the creative energy is always sort of flowing. So are you able to, do you find that sometimes you're able to just kind of tap into the kind of, you know, the flow and kind of get the momentum that way?
I do think it helps. Like if I feel stuck in my writing, I'll read a scene aloud to him, or I'll just set the writing down for a while and do something else that's creative but not related to writing. Right. So it's really nice having a partner who's not in the exact same space, but who understands.
I love what you just said about putting down writing, but doing something else that's creative when you kind of feel, you know, blocked or stagnant. I've found that too. You know, sometimes like if I am having a hard time with words, if I draw, that's or paint or something, it kind of taps into the same part of your consciousness, your creative consciousness, but it doesn't have the same pressure. Maybe like you have to come up with good sentences or what's this character going to do next? So I wonder if other writers who are listening do that as well. It would be cool to hear like what the alternate creative move is. And I'm also thinking even like dancing and singing is such a great way. I mean, just any way you're expressing yourself and also like letting go of your, you know, inhibitions, like you're just kind of making yourself more open, you know? And I think it's that going back to the difference between writing and being an author, you know, what I find is I have a much easier time opening myself up when I'm writing, but then when I'm having to be an author, I feel myself closing a little bit, you know?
I know what you mean.
So maybe we need to like reevaluate how we do like author events for everyone to do something creative. Maybe we'll have everyone dance at our book event, Greg.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. Is he available?
There was no question there.
Right. More of an observation. If he could come play guitar for a little while, that would be great as well. I mean, if we could get the guitar going, we'll dance. It'll just everyone in the creative.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to, sorry, Greg, I wanted to ask you, Lauren, was I think you've done a really wonderful, generous service to authors by sharing so much about your process on social media. And I really appreciate that personally, and also just, you know, kind of at large for people being able to observe like the specifics of the process. For example, you shared your query letter to get your agent and your experience of how many agents you queried and, you know, who you actually heard back from, you know, not specifically. And I think this is a part of the publishing process that doesn't get talked about enough or shared about enough. So I'm curious, was that just something you felt kind of you wanted to do naturally? Was that part of you providing something maybe you were looking for yourself that you didn't find at the time?
Yeah, I think when I was first learning how to query, and I queried a different novel first before Society of Lies, and no one wanted that novel that I queried. So I felt that I needed to learn a lot more about that whole process. So I did a lot of research. I bought craft books and books on querying and watched different YouTube channels on querying and read everything I could find. And so while I was learning all of this, I wanted to just keep track of it for other writers who were in the same situation as I was.
Awesome.
Have you found any, we're always curious for ourselves and also just for listeners, were there any craft books in particular that you connected to or were helpful or kind of informed you, where you're going?
Yeah, I always tell people Save the Cat writes a novel and Save the Cat writes for TV are two just great ones on structure.
Yeah.
And that I don't use it as much now when I'm plotting, but I think the beats are in my story, and I definitely use that 3-act structure with a twist in the middle, a low point at the end of Act 2,
right.
Like an inciting incident and something to push you into Act 2. All these major beats are definitely part of the structure that I like to use. So Save the Cat. What else? Modern Library Writers Workshop, I think, is a great one.
Okay.
It has a lot of stylistic writing advice, which I thought was great, and On Writing by Stephen King.
Sure. Yeah.
Nice. Love that. Have you read Bird by Bird, Anne Lamott?
Yeah, I love that one too.
Yeah.
I thought it was very inspiring that it doesn't have to be perfect. The first draft can be messy.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
You mentioned a few minutes ago that it sounded like, I think if I heard you right, you were saying that you sort of will put the beats in place when you're going in, but then those sort of drop away a little bit. Are you finding as you're getting more confident that you're able to kind of, let the structure drop away and write a little more kind of freely outside of that framework?
Yeah. For the second book, I outlined for a year and I thought I knew what I was going to do. But then when I started writing, it turned into 5 POVs, third person, and it was just too complicated. So I got rid of most of those and started completely over. And now I'm down to 2 POVs in first person.
Wow. Talk about that moment when you were like, I have to scrap this, because that's huge. It's a huge amount of work to outline for a year, and then however much you wrote, but that's like a breakup.
I know, it's devastating, but it happens so much now. Yeah. And I think I did learn with the first book, with Society of Lies, that all the rewriting was worth it in the end. And I didn't realize that going into the process, that when you rewrite a scene, you can save what you had before in case you want to go back to it, but you're often going to make it better.
Yeah.
Or yeah, that's what I think, at least.
Absolutely.
Do you feel more pressure now on the second book because of all of the amazing reception and feedback?
I think so. I don't know. I'm not sure. I haven't been writing in the past week since Society of Lies came out because I just wanted to fully focus on everything. I've been writing a bunch of thank you notes here to my beta readers and people like that. I don't know. I haven't really thought about it yet.
Yeah, don't think too much about it. I take it back.
You mentioned earlier that you do aerial silks, right? Is that something where you're able to, when you do get into, if you talked about a little bit earlier about maybe changing your artistic focus, sometimes getting away from that, going towards music, going towards dancing, whatever. Do you find that having like a physical outlet also is a good way to kind of reset your brain or kind of get out of that headspace that you're getting mired down in?
Yeah, I first got into aerial silks because I had this knee injury where I couldn't like hike or do the things or dance or do the things I really wanted to do at that time. Right. So I started doing silks and learned, I think it's been since around 2015. Yeah, so maybe about 10 years. And it's a great outlet just to not feel like you have to be perfect and I'm never going to perform. I'm never going to be in the circus. So it's just really for fun. And it's nice to have something totally separate from work. A hobby, really.
Yeah. This is going to surprise both of you. There was about a year of my life when I did aerial silks because I had a friend at the time who started teaching who got a studio space out in Brooklyn. And they had this kind of open,
Wow.
she and her partner had this open house thing and just invited friends to come out and they performed. And then they invited people to get up on the silts and do climb, like simple climbs. So I get out there and I do a climb and I got up there and I managed to get like half into a flip. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. And I ended up doing it for about a year until she moved to the West Coast. So
Wow.
there is something.
That's
really,
amazing.
yeah. And something about like, I always found the weightlessness of it, like being up there and suspended and kind of weightless. You just are so tuned in to the moment, but also kind of out of your body at the same time, which is really interesting. And you're just so pinpoint focused on that thing that you kind of just, it takes you out of your head, whether you are trying to or not in that way. So,
yeah, absolutely. I'm really into the idea of flow state.
Yes.
And that book from the 70s or 80s, called Flow. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but I just love the feeling of being so consumed in your activity or work or whatever it is that you're in this state where your mind is just fully focused on the present.
Yeah.
Like you said.
Well, we talk about, Liz and I actually talk about flow state in writing specifically. And it's always that thing of, how do you get out of your own way enough and stop being cerebral where you just dive into that subconscious thing with the writing? How do you kind of get into that sort of sub layer where you're not overthinking stuff? That's always that sweet spot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's the thing I feel like we're constantly, at least I'm chasing. I think Greg too. Lauren, do you feel like that is for you? Like what do you find to be the most gratifying aspect of this crazy job?
Mm-hmm. Well, two things. One, I really love the actual craft of sitting at your desk and writing. But I do also love that fiction is an exchange of ideas. And so I love to talk about these ideas and be a little bit vulnerable in, small one-on-one or through 3-person conversations, like small groups of people, and get like deep on a certain subject. It was so meaningful to me over the weekend. Someone at my book event came up to me and said, I read your novel and it was the first time I felt seen. And like, that just meant so much to me. So yeah, like comments like that and that kind of interaction is really meaningful, I think.
Wow, that's fantastic. I was actually wondering, because you are so kind of early in this part of the process of people giving you feedback, I didn't know how much maybe you've gotten, but what is important to you that people take away from the book, do you think? I mean, someone saying this is the first time I felt seen is just, wow, that's incredible. You're done. You don't have to write another book.
I know. That was my ultimate goal, just to reach one person. So,
wow.
My goal for my writing is to explore these complicated moral issues and deeper subjects that we don't always talk about, so that hopefully we can understand one another's perspectives better and bring us closer together. So I don't necessarily want to put too much of my own opinion into my writing, and I want to encourage people to, talk about it. They don't have to agree with me, because I think that in our country, especially right now, we've gotten so divided and so into our own in-group. Whoever we feel is our tribe, we're so protective of that tribe and unwilling to see other people's perspectives. And so I really want to encourage people to talk, and find some commonality.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important, as you said, in our political moment, our social moment, everything going on. It also makes me think of, they say one of the things that great art does is, ask the right questions as opposed to provide the right answers. And I think to the point of what we're talking about, you do have people now, because of like social media, because of this kind of tribalism or whatever, where people really are in their own kind of vacuums, right? Their own information vacuums and these sort of like information loops. And, I think more than, or as important as ever, I'll say, is that art is able to kind of push those things and to ask those questions and to open up that dialogue. So, I think it's wonderful that that seems like it's part of your kind of maybe mission statement is the right term, but to ask those questions in your work, it's beautiful. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, that's my goal. And to reach other people who feel, at least with this book, who feel like they never really fit in, felt like an outsider. Maybe they're multiracial. Maybe they just didn't fit in wherever they were growing up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and just, with our last couple of minutes, I'm thinking, the kind of beauty of books that create, discussion and even discourse and book clubs in that equation. And I think that your novel is so amazing for book clubs. So I just wanted to, I'm sure it's been said before and it will be said many more times, but I'm really excited for you because I know that's been one of the most kind of gratifying aspects of our writing books is people talking about them at length, with a community over food or drinks or whatever the scenario is. So have you had that kind of experience yet? And is that one of the things you wanted to happen with this book?
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. It would be amazing if book clubs read the book and talked about them. I'd love to listen in to their conversation and just hear, because, you do your best with a book, but I don't necessarily know how people will react to it or interpret it.
I will say, I think that you have, mission accomplished. I think that you've done that really beautifully with this book. So
thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for writing it. And we are so excited for whatever you got cooking for the next one as well.
We are.
Thanks, I really appreciate that.
You'll come back on. And
of course.
Where can listeners who haven't connected with you online, where can they find you on social media, etc.?
It's just my name. So it's at Lauren Ling Brown on Threads, Instagram, TikTok, though I'm mostly on Instagram and Threads. Okay. My website is laurenlingbrown.com.
Okay.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you, Lauren. Thank you for taking a week, an hour out of what I know has been an insane week for you, and I'm sure will continue to be in the, for the foreseeable future. It was wonderful to talk to you and hear all about this book, and we can't wait to talk to you again.
Thanks for having me. It was so much fun.
Our pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Imposter Hour with Liz and Greg is created and hosted by us, Elizabeth Keenan and Greg Wans. The show is produced and edited by Bookwild Collective founder Kate Hergen. Scott Leeds composed our original theme music, and Steve Luoma designed our logo.
And you can find us on Instagram at Imposter Hour Podcast and online at imposterhour.com. Thanks for